some guy grows uppity and he decides he wants to grow green corn instead of blue corn, they're going to be like, hey, no, man, ancestors said blue corn. And maybe that green corn sucks. Maybe they already figured that out and they don't need to waste the space growing that green corn. Okay. I'm Sam, and this is the Illegitimate Scholar Podcast, the weekly cultural anthropology and history podcast that makes sense of our senseless world through indigenous and historical examples, academic methods in social science, and a perspective not limited by the crushing restrictions that come with traditional academia and public schools. Today, how do religions form and evolve based on new and changing circumstances? What do they practically provide adherents and cultures? So, what do religions provide practically? As in, how do they help the culture to expand, to sustain themselves, to make the people feel okay, content, all these things? What do they give to the culture? And that'll make more sense if it doesn't yet, very soon. And so we're definitely not going to be talking about religion today from a personal perspective. So keep that in mind. I don't want to be brash about the way I'm doing this, but just for the sake of time and brevity, I can't just be like, okay, like I get that this is important. Like just understand that, you know, I've been doing this the whole time. This is the last Anthropology of Religion episode. It's, you know, we're talking about it from an academic perspective today. So how do religious beliefs reflect their environment? So this is their environment in the case of human, physical, and the needs of the specific society. So what social constructs you already have built up. You know, there's certain needs that come just based on the institutions that people have built. And that's an aspect of human geography. And what conditions lead to a new religious practice and the decline of old? And what examples? And syncretic religions and their extremes is what we're going to end on. And actually, we're not going to end on that because after that, I'm going to go through some more specific examples of religions applied practically. So honestly, today, there's probably about 15 different cultures I'm going to talk about. I think people like it when I do that. And I'm just going to be giving you a lot of different arguments about how religions, you know, reflect their environment and how they work practically and where they come out of, and some interesting syncretic religions that come out of multiple different cultures, and then those cultures interact to create something entirely new, which is really, really interesting. And you can see a lot of these rules in those extreme situations. So yeah, I think it's actually a really good show today, and I hope you enjoy it. So here we go. All right. Okay, so how do religious beliefs reflect their environment? And when do religions change? So I'm going to start by talking about a few different basic types of religions. So there's animism and shamanism. And I put these together because they're usually found in the same culture, same environment. I mean, shamans can be found in every society. They are found in every society. But generally, there's more, and those are the only religious practitioners for somebody that's living in an animist culture. So what is an animist culture? An animist culture is a belief in a culture that everything has an energy force. I brought this up before. Mana is an example of this. This is animism. There's also like midichlorians. I've said that probably a couple times. I mean, that's really it. You know, it's in everything. Or the woke example was racism. Racism is in everything. It's in every law and every institution. And I think Robin DiAngelo said it's the sole cause of disparities. It's just racism. Can't possibly be anything else. So it's this force that's in everything. Chi is another example. Shamanism. This is contacting the spirit world. We've been over this in the last episode, so just brushing over it. Shamans use drugs, trance, and other methods to communicate with the spirit world, which is considered to be another, like, basically another realm of existence that exists kind of within our own. If you've ever had a hallucinogenic experience, this is the spirit world. This is a example of the spirit world. So this isn't some crazy abstract concept. It's essentially you've entered into a different state of consciousness, which is measurable by modern science very, very easily. This is very well documented. This isn't, maybe it's not another physical place that you're transported to, but it's well understood that there are other states of consciousness that you can reach any number of different ways. And shamans are people who solve problems and do other things. I mean, they're so broad, they're found everywhere. Way different examples. They communicate with the spirit world to solve other people's problems and do other things. It could be any number of things. So these are found in hunter-gatherer societies, right? And the content of what they're studying and what they're teaching, this all comes from where they live. So you're going to have different beliefs if you're by the ocean than if you're in the mountains, and your gods are going to reflect that. And we're going to come back to that in a minute, where your gods or your religion is going to reflect your environment when we talk about the Polynesians. But more broadly, like, there are these different environments which, based on those, based on how you're making your living, like hunter gatherers could be anything from Native Americans living in the forest hunting deer and small game like squirrels and opossums rather, and growing maize and squash and beans. The Three Sisters was grown extensively across North and Central America. Or you could be on the water. You could be on the water on an island, maybe. And for example, the Native Americans that lived on the coast in New England, they ate a lot of quahogs, and they would hide where they or quahogs and other shellfish. They would eat a lot of shellfish, and they would protect their shellfish locations. There's a good shellfish spot. You don't want someone else finding them. You want those to be your shellfish. Yeah. So yeah, it's like that, right? So your religion is going to reflect like the aesthetics, the content of your religion is going to reflect, if you're fishing, it's going to reflect the fishing gods are going to be more important, or ocean gods are going to be more important if you're more advanced. Or if you're hunting deer, you might have hunter gods, you might have animistic deer gods. The predators that you live in, like Central America, they revere like leopards, and I think up in the Northeast, up in the Northeast of North America, eagles, things like that. I mean, eagles all over North America, bears as well. All of these apex predators, wherever they are, that's going to affect what is revered, what is viewed as powerful, is what different animals you're interacting with, and also what other people you're interacting with, right? And what you'll see is that when these hunter gatherers, they start butting up against other societies, and these could be either 3,000 years ago chieftain level societies butting up with hunter gatherers, or it could be today state level societies going to islands in the South Pacific and creating cargo cults after them, which we've talked about briefly. So in general, these animistic and animistic specifically, these people, the rules that they have really push sustainability. And I know sustainability is a weird word because it's associated with like climate change and everything, but it is true that the hunter gatherers, they generally have beliefs that in practice do lead them to preserve things. And there's like, stereotypes about this of like, oh, Native Americans as the noble savage, stewards of the land. But I mean, this isn't just true of Native Americans that were hunter gatherers or pastoralists. It's also true of the hunter gatherers of everywhere else in the world. And it just makes sense because if you're a hunter gatherer, and they're not using a lot of technology, then human civilizations would have had to survive for tens of thousands of years. They would have to survive over long time periods, and they would, pass down these ideas, and these ideas would over time, just lead them to not, destroy the land around them. And this, of course, you don't want to destroy the land around you when you're a hunter-gatherer society that has a long time preference. They had a much longer time preference than us. That's not something I can get into right now because I'm already talking too much. I'm still on the first page, but they think in much longer time frames than us. We worry about 3 months. 3 months. 3 months is the quarter. That's what a lot of, even if you personally are not thinking in terms of 3 months, a lot of your life is dictated by that 3 months, because the people making the biggest decisions, they're worried about that 3 month, 1 year, fiscal year thing. And that's affecting your life. Okay. But I digress. So, all right. They were hunter gatherers. So let's talk about polytheism. Polytheism is very broad. It's many gods, but generally it gets to polytheism, a pantheon, when you're at the point where people are settling down into chiefdoms and then early state level societies. So the Polynesians were polytheistic. That's the specific example I'm going to go into today. But also like the Greeks, the Romans, I think Zoroastrianism was polytheistic. It was leaning in towards monotheism. Egyptian religion was polytheistic, but it leaned into monotheism at certain points. Hinduism tends to, people argue whether it's monotheistic or polytheistic. I tend to believe it is monotheistic. And I can't even go into that. That's not what we're talking about. But their polytheism is so broad, just so we're clear. But we're going to talk about Polynesians, and we're going to talk about Polynesians, their traditional religion, and the details I just talked about before. We're going to apply them to Polynesians. Okay, so polytheistic people they're politically more advanced than hunter-gatherers, or not more advanced, but more complex is the point. Okay, there's more complexity built into them. So these people, the Polynesians, their root is in Austronesia. So they're an Austronesian people, or they split from the Austronesian people. So they would have originated, if the mainstream archaeology, anthropology is correct, they would have originated in Formosa, which is today Taiwan, a few thousand years ago. And that's where their gods were rooted in. But they left there, they started seafaring. Seafaring, then, that is the content. That is like the theme, that would be influenced in their culture. And they started, their gods that were based in these water-based, ocean-going things started to become more important. And they've replaced other stories. The exact process of that is lost to time. There's no way we can know. You might be able to find clues in some Polynesian mythology, but I don't personally know. Maybe one day I'll be able to talk to a Polynesian person who has some insight on this, but it's not Googleable. So they were advanced seafarers, and advanced seafarers, when I say that, I mean like they were, like, in their own way, you could compare them to the British Empire of the largest kingdom ever. And I'm sure some of you are rolling your eyes at that, but the fact is that while we can do what they did today, we can't do it the way they did it, and we don't even understand how they did it. Like, it's so complex. These islands are so spread out that their culture was able to figure out ways, just based on how intimately involved with the sea they were. They were able to go thousands of miles away and find islands that were thousands of miles away from the next closest island. And they were just able to find them. I don't know how. I've heard theories. I don't know how. But their culture was able to figure that out, and we don't know how. We can do it with big metal boats with radar on them and satellites guiding them. They did it on, like, catamaran canoes. Big ones, but catamaran canoes. Just incredible. Okay, nothing but reverence for the Polynesians. Love them. Love their culture. Absolutely. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Geeking out a little bit about Polynesians. That's okay. So some specific examples, I just ranted about it for a while, but Maui is said to have pulled their origin story is Maui used his macaw, I think is how you pronounce it. His claw, pulled it out of the ocean, pulled these islands out of the ocean. And that's reflective of the physical environment. And then the theme, the content of having this demigod that has a fish hook, because fishing is prominent for them because that's a main food source. That is massive. That is why it's so important, because that's such an important part of their life. There's also Tangaroa. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. I did look these ones up before, but I looked up a lot. So that's the god of the sea, feared but could help you. So this is one of those magic divination type situations. I don't remember which one. Pele, the goddess, fire, volcanoes, lightning, also childbirth. Those are related, probably because they're, these are like considered battles. I mean, there's lots of cultures that view childbirth in the context of being compared to battles. And that's because, just like with battles, with men fighting, there was a high death rate for women in childbirth forever, basically up until 150, 200 years ago. This has been figured out very recently, how to not let a lot of women die from childbirth. So it was like battle, and like many other things, it was up to chance, and it was seen as the realm of the gods, because, anything can happen. Like, you could be the best fighter ever, you get shot in the eye. You could be nothing but an amazing woman, and, whatever complications from childbirth, you might die. Real awful. Happened a lot in the past. Still happens today. Still awful. But yeah, moving on. Monotheism. Sorry, I did not mean to say moving on like that after talking about such a serious topic. Okay, monotheism. So, monotheism, just want to say it comes on a spectrum, right? I think this is my opinion, but to me, there's more deviation from concentration on monotheism, one God, because what you have is you have Protestantism, which doesn't have all these saints, and there's another thing in Orthodox religions versus the saints in Catholicism, and those are elements of at least the roots of polytheism, if not polytheism itself. And then you look at Islam, and it's like, no, it's one God. It's one God, definitely one God. And they have lesser prophets as well, but really it comes down to one God, and that's kind of why I think, to me, and if anybody, I know I have a couple Muslim listeners. If you're Muslim, you're listening to this, you have some insight on it, please let me know. But I think that comes from, in Islam, or at least a manifestation of that in Islam, is being completely against idolatry. And I think the reason for that is that when you produce idols, those idols over time, different populations will change and reflect new environments. And when you do that, those are ways for the religion to be split up. Those are symbols that people rally, that instead of uniting people, they then divide them. So with having no idols, you're really just the purest of monotheists. And that's kind of how I view the Islamic religion. And there's other elements to it, because there are those lesser prophets than the I think the one prophet, or however Muslims refer to Muhammad. But if you don't want idolatry, I mean, you're really into that one idea. Maybe I'm misinterpreting that, but that is at least my perspective from it. And this monotheism is associated with centralized hierarchical societies. So in a lot of monotheistic societies, they're monarchies. And this tracks with what I was saying before, where I think that Protestantism is more monotheistic than Catholicism and Orthodox. You don't see Protestantism come about until the age of absolutism in the 1500s. So this is a time when monarchs in Europe were taking a lot more power. And this, to me, is tied in with this Protestant Reformation, where the power of the church is reduced and in a lot of places taken under the state. So it was very direct in England, where you had the Anglican religion. And having Catholicism, I've talked about this before, but Catholicism did protect past cultural practices within saints and other methods of the religion. But with Protestantism, the queen at the time, Elizabeth I, was one of them in the 1500s or 1600s, 1500s. She was in charge of the church, and that meant that everything went through her. And of course, there was still a church hierarchy, but she was at the top of it. And that is more monotheistic. It's more oneness. It's more up to one, and that matches with absolutism. I hope that makes sense. So, the Roman Empire, as it became an empire, it shifted into Christianity, and that happened after a little while, a few hundred years of the empire. But the empire was also changing through that time as well, and it's not like the empire becoming an empire happened over time with Augustus. But we can't get into that today. So the Egyptians, I might have brought this up earlier, but the Egyptians, there was a guy whose name was Akhenaten, and he decided to make what we know of as the first monotheistic religion. There was probably one before this, but we don't have any record of it. He decided that he was going to make a religion and everyone worship one god named Aten. In this guy's name was Akhenaten, and he decided to name the one monotheistic god Aten. Akhenaten, and then Aten was the god. So that's pretty on the nose. Okay, that was the first one. They didn't have any ideas yet. This guy was just like, oh yeah, I'll just name the god Aten. My name's Akhenaten. People won't notice that I'm making one true god and I'm associating myself with it. But I think eventually it stuck, because the pharaohs were like god kings. But it's complicated. It's complicated. So people destroyed records of him afterwards. We know about him from very few examples, but they destroyed records of him. This happened a lot, by the way. So there's always stuff that we don't really know about that happened. So, syncretic religions. I brought these up earlier. So, what are they, and what do they tell us about religions in general? And so, I mean, in a certain way, all religions are syncretic because it's the bringing together of multiple different religions, and that's kind of how they evolve anyway. Or, new technology, new environment, but it's different things coming together. But syncretic religions, they combine elements of two or more different religions in a little bit more of an obvious way. So I'll give you some examples. They're a lot more literal in this sense. So it's very obvious that they're mixing together. So voodoo, you guys might know about voodoo. Involves shamans, one of the things we've talked about. So there's a situation where slaves are brought from Africa to the Caribbean. You might have heard of it. It's called the transatlantic slave trade. So these slaves, these people who were taken as slaves, they are bought from people who took them in African kingdoms, people who went on slave raids. They're sold to Europeans who then bring them to, in this case, Haiti. And in Haiti, people combined their new environment with a bunch of diverse cultures. So there was the West African cultures, and what would have happened is these slave kingdoms would have been taking slaves from multiple different cultures. So they would go out and do slave raids. This is one of those situations where often it's a kingdom maybe interacting with hunter-gatherers. So these more advanced, more complex in political elements, these African kingdoms, they were able to, with their increased numbers, their complexity, their weapons they were able to produce, they were able to go out, grab hunter-gatherers, and often hunter-gatherers, sometimes just other kingdoms, or chiefdoms, and then they would sell those people to the Europeans, but they would mix them up. They would purposefully mix people. I don't know how often. Maybe they wouldn't do this all the time, but maybe 15 people from one language, 30 from another. They're not mutually intelligible. They're from hundreds of miles away. But they're all from West Africa. So there were common elements a lot of times, but there were many, many different diverse cultures of local things. So it's also influenced by Catholicism because of the French culture there. They were Catholic, and French culture influenced them as well. So they needed to find a way to create a religion, or maybe they didn't need to. But what happened is that a religion came out of the interaction of all these different things. So it's a terrible situation, obviously, but people found a way of taking what they knew from the past, and with their new environment, they created something new and out of it. And obviously it was a bad situation, but it created something that was a source of hope, a source of meaning, a source of healing, different things. Voodoo sometimes, especially with shamanistic stuff like that, it can get pretty dark, but it often isn't. And I think that the negative aspects of voodoo are portrayed a little bit more than the positive aspects, but they all have good and bad. So speaking of terrible situations, let's talk about the Native American Church. So the Native American Church was founded in Oklahoma, Indian Territory. I think back when it was Indian Territory. So what you have is a situation where Native Americans were being forced off their homes and brought to Oklahoma in this case, which was then called Indian Territory. It's called Westward Expansion and the Indian Removal Act and all these other wars that had happened up to then. But that's the big one in this case. So this new technology, and this technology being, railroads and all these things, the world is shrinking. People are able to travel. There's more logistical movement. Medicine is getting better. People are able to move around more and not risk getting diseases. All these things are happening. It's shrinking the world. So the need for a pan-Native American, which is, extensively for all Native Americans, was created. And also the fact that all these different tribes were brought to this one location against their will. So, this is the Trail of Tears. Indian Removal Act is the Trail of Tears. So they're in Oklahoma, and this new situation has happened. Again, bad situation. But this religion then comes out of this new environment based on this new technology, all the new things they had learned. So, Christianity is one of these things, but it's also all these different diverse Native American beliefs. And so some of the details of this religion, some of the things it includes is the Great Spirit, a single creator. And that could possibly be reflective of Christianity, but it also, there were examples of the Great Spirit in multiple different Native American religions, just not all of them. Peyote, which is only from a very small part of North America, but this was something that was incorporated into this new religion, and now it is something that's important to a lot of different Native American religions. Excuse me, Native American cultures and different people. Visions, community, and it's against alcohol. Okay, so that is, and if you don't know, there is a very large problem with alcoholism in many different Native American communities, specifically, like a higher percentage than other races. So, and that is, maybe it's cultural. There could be a genetic component. There is a genetic component for addiction. So I don't know if that carries over to population levels. I'm not the guy who knows about that, but that is something that it's anti-alcohol. This religion being anti-alcohol seems to be reflective of alcoholism being a major problem in the Native American community. So, you'll have rules that come out based on the problems that you have in your community. So that was the Native American church. Mormon religion. So this is American Christianity. In the Mormon religion in the past, and I don't know if this is still canon for them, but Native Americans were cursed people. Black people were not allowed into the church until the 1970s. I'm sorry, Mormons. I'm sorry for on you. I'm using you as an academic example. I like Mormon people. They've been very nice to me. I went to Mormon church once. It was very nice. Not for me, but it was very nice. So they think the U.S. Constitution is divinely inspired, which actually I agree with, to be honest. I legitimately share that belief. So I like that one. I don't like the other stuff. But the point is that, Native Americans are cursed. Black people not allowed in. It's an American religion. Okay. It was a country founded for white people. They're not wrong when they say that. That's what it was. Not really what we are anymore, but that's what it was. So it makes sense because it's a syncretic American religion. It's come out of this new environment. Not everyone adopted it, but I don't know. Maybe it would have been a good thing if everybody adopted it. But they would have had to loosen the rules a little bit, I think, is kind of what stopped them. And maybe people were too tied into regionalism at the time. But it might have worked today under different circumstances and a more coherent culture, but we certainly don't have that now. So now I'm going to go through a last few collection of examples, speed round, really hammer this stuff in about how cultural practices can reflect the environment. And this is religious in the sense that I've talked about before, that religion used to be and is in a lot of places just everything that you do. It's all built into it. And that brings me to my first example, which is the blue corn of the Hopi. So the Hopi believe that they recreate feelings of humility and harmony their ancestors experienced when they chose this specific corn. So the Hopi Native Americans, they grow this blue corn. And in their belief system, which is part of their religion, they believe that when they are planting the corn, which they're just going to eat, not just eat, they're going to eat it, and eating it is also going to have a religious significance, but they're going to be planting it, and it's also going to be at the same time that it's practical in the sense that they're growing food. They're growing a specific variety of corn, and their culture tells them that this is a religious event that they're doing, and they're encouraged to continue to grow this type of corn, likely because people in the past found that this was the best corn to grow. Maybe someday some guy grows uppity and he decides he wants to grow green corn instead of blue corn. They're going to be like, hey, no, man, ancestors said blue corn. And maybe that green corn sucks. Maybe they already figured that out and they don't need to waste the space growing that green corn. So they got the blue corn, and it's religious, connects you to the ancestors. You grow it. What a wonderful thing. Yeah, that's how I feel about it. So there's a ritual that the Netsilik Inuit practice. So these are hunters. They're up there in the Great White North, And these are rituals that they practice when an animal is hunted. So they believe if they do the proper ritual when they hunt and kill an animal, then the animal will be pleased and it will come back. And this comes out of a respect for nature, but this is very practical in the sense that if you believe that you have to do a proper ritual and it's an animistic belief, they believe they have spirit, energy, souls, they believe that the animal will come back. And that, number one, it legitimizes them as being allowed to hunt, but it encourages them to not waste. It'd be really nice if we, were a little bit more respectful, myself included. I often am not respectful and wasteful and everything. And these types of beliefs they really encourage a culture to have real respect for the nature around them. And these are practical and they preserve things over time. Traditional cultures, animistic cultures, they never had human caused issues where they were cutting the tops off of mountains and then having, erosion everywhere of all this stuff coming off, runoff off the mountain, just destroying everything. Like there's problems with mountain top mining, but I digress. As always. Okay, mana. We've already talked about that. Well, so there's energy in all things, even the rocks. Okay. So the one thing about this is that that might seem dumb, but if you respect the rocks, you respect even the sand, you're just not going to screw with the environment. If everything, it's just like the Native American, or not the Native Americans, the Inuit, which are, I guess, a type of Native American, but the Inuit, they're not going to waste the seal if they respect the seal and they do the specific ritual. And if you think there's souls in all things, you're going to respect all things if you really believe it in you. Okay. Whereas in, Christianity and Judaism and Islam, it's dominion over the earth. Okay. So human beings have dominion over the earth, and the fish, they're ours to take. That's a practical thing in a religion that is more industrial, you might say. I mean, not as industrial back then, but still more industrial, more building up, more change to the environment. Indigenous people, hunter gatherers, they did affect their environment, just not in the same ways, and not in as severe ways, and not in as destructive ways as well. And that's both the modern society the most, but also even like the Roman Empire and other societies. Over farming is thought to be one of the causes of why the Fertile Crescent is now deserts. Fertile Crescent being like ancient civilization. So the Hajj in Islam, this is one that I like. I'm sure someone's written about this idea, but Islam comes out, and I've talked about this before, but we won't come back to religion for a while, but I do want to do a religion episode. Muhammad was a trader, Trader. I've talked about this. He was a trader, and he came out of a culture of Bedouin Arabs who were of mixed religions. They were traders, and they were in this kind of dangerous environment because they didn't, not everything was safe, but everybody under one banner. Islam expands very, very quickly through warfare and also just people joining them. And everybody's united. They have this crazy golden age where they're able to trade everything. They're able to trade everywhere because everything's safe and everyone's making a bunch of money because they made everything safe. And that's the practical sense of Islam. And for most of Islam's history, it was in caliphates. It was in Islamic empires that were completely interconnected with the political system. It was all one system. They were integrated. It's not like today, It's very, like I've said, it's very modern world to compartmentalize these things. So the Hajj. The Hajj is something that I think many Muslims believe they're supposed to do at least once in their life. So that is a pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia to go to Mecca, which to touch the Kiba, I think. I'm sorry if I'm getting the wrong term, but that is a pilgrimage. And to me, that seems very practical as well, because if you, as a Muslim, are expected to go on a pilgrimage to travel, that seems very good for an empire because it unites everybody through this one experience. Everyone in an empire that's very vast, and that's Islam has always been in that empire form up until the last 100 years. So you You encourage people to travel to the center of the empire. It's reverence for that as the center, as the one place. It creates community between people of all different walks of life all around the empire under this one banner of Islam, which is also connected to the caliphate, and or the sultan, or whatever it is. And it encourages trade as well. This is an empire that encourages trade. So traveling long distances, this is a thing um, that's just a cultural thing that's associated with traders, is because they have to trade, they have to travel. And then I also want to touch on Persia or Iran for a second. They I don't know exactly how they adopted Islam, but they're a different type of Islam than the other guys. So, you know, they had their own culture. There were lots of other cultures that existed, but all of those people, they just all decided, or most of them decided, other ones were force converted. Everybody's under this one religion, and that made sense for them. Some of these smaller peoples are kind of just absorbed in, but they become Muslim, and maybe they keep some of their local traditions. I'm just not sure. But in Iran, they already had a very, very complex system. And they did convert to Islam, but they became Shia Muslims. And I assume there was some sort of cultural difference that was in Persians, which got them to decide on this different ecclesiastical decision for this other explanation to make sense. It's a difference of the succession of Muhammad. So who comes after? I don't remember the specifics. But the point is, there's a difference, and it manifested itself differently in this different Bedouin Arab nomad culture, and then in this ancient Persian culture, both of them having deep roots. So it's practical, and it's culturally informed, because whatever it was about that other thing, whatever it was about the difference, it made the Persians not want it, and they chose this one instead. It also lets them have their own continued control. Okay, so I'm gonna end it there. I've been talking for a long time, so please join the Discord. If you want to sign up to the Patreon, please do that. I'm gonna switch over to that for just a second.